The man in the car did not look frantic or dangerous. He looked calm. He spoke like someone who belonged there, like an adult who already knew the family, and on that September morning in 1968, that was enough to break through an 8-year-old girl's caution. Tali Shapiro was on her way to school in Los Angeles when Rodney Alcala pulled up beside her and offered her a ride. She said no at first. Then he told her he knew her parents. A man named Donald Haynes noticed the exchange from nearby traffic and did not like what he was seeing. There was something wrong in the way the man was talking to the little girl, wrong enough that he kept watching even after the car pulled away. Haynes followed them to a Hollywood apartment building. He saw the girl go inside with the man. At that point, he had to make a choice. He did not know exactly what was happening behind that door, and he did not know whether he was about to involve himself in something violent, but he knew enough to act. He called police and reported what he had seen. That decision, made in minutes by a stranger who trusted his own instincts, is the reason Tali Shapiro lived long enough to tell the story at all. Inside the apartment, Alcala attacked her with extreme violence. When Officer Chris Camacho arrived, he found the child gravely injured and barely alive. Blood was on the floor. Her body had been beaten so badly that officers initially believed they were too late. Camacho chose to stay with the girl and save her, rather than chase the man fleeing out the back. That choice let Alcala escape for the moment, but it kept Tali alive. Later, she would say that the police had made the right decision. The only reason there was any future to protect was because they stopped to save her first. She did not wake up and simply return to childhood. Recovery was long and brutal. She spent 32 days in a coma and months more healing from injuries that would have ended most lives. She was 8 years old. Adults around her made choices they thought would protect her, including limiting what she knew about the case and keeping her from testifying at the time. In later years, Shapiro said she was grateful for that decision because she had not been forced to carry the full weight of the court case while she was still a child, trying to survive what had been done to her. But the cost of that protection would not stay contained to one family. Alcala ran. To avoid arrest for the attack on Tali Shapiro, he left California, went east, and used an alias while he studied in New York. The attack in Hollywood did not stop him. It did not even slow him enough. Years later, investigators and prosecutors would look back at that gap in time with the kind of clarity that only comes after bodies begin to stack up. The man who had nearly killed a child in Los Angeles was still moving freely through the world, still able to present himself as intelligent, educated, and harmless, still able to approach women and girls without announcing what he was. He was eventually caught and prosecuted in connection with the assault on Shapiro, but because she did not testify, prosecutors were left without the strongest witness to the crime. He ended up pleading guilty to child molestation and served only about 34 months in prison. It was a short sentence for an attack that had nearly taken a child's life. It was the kind of outcome that looks unbearable in hindsight because hindsight knows what came next. After his release, Alcala continued attacking women and girls. He went on to murder multiple victims in California and New York, and later became nationally notorious as the so-called dating game killer after appearing on television in the middle of his wider pattern of predation. For Tali Shapiro, the years did not erase what happened, but they changed its place in her life. She grew up. She built an adult life. She did not let the worst morning of her childhood become the only thing that defined her. The man who attacked her was still moving through courts, headlines, appeals, and new investigations, but she was no longer the child found on that apartment floor. By the time Alcala faced a major California trial again in 2010, this time for a string of murders, she had lived with the knowledge of what he had done to her for decades. Now she had the chance to stand in a courtroom as an adult and speak for herself. When Shapiro testified during the penalty phase of Alcala's 2010 trial, she was no longer the missing child in the old police file. She was a grown woman telling a jury exactly who he was. Reporters covering the case described her as composed and direct. She had willingly identified herself publicly after giving that testimony. She was not there for spectacle. She was there because the man who had beaten and sexually assaulted her as a child was again before a jury, and this time her voice would be part of what they heard before deciding whether he should ever live outside a prison again. That testimony mattered not only because of emotion, but because it filled in a truth that had been missing from the legal record for years. Alcala had long been able to keep moving, partly because crucial moments in his history had not fully landed in front of juries when they should have. Shapiro's presence changed that. She was living proof that one of his earliest known attacks had not ended in death only because a witness paid attention and a police officer reached her in time. Her survival did not make the assault lesser. It made the chain of cause and effect clearer. He had already shown exactly what he was capable of in 1968. The jury convicted Alcala of 5 murders in that California case, and in March 2010 he was sentenced to death for a 3rd time. Later, he also pleaded guilty in New York to 2 additional murders. He died in prison in 2021. By then, investigators believed the true number of his victims might be far higher than the cases they could prove. But for all the public fascination with his television appearance, his photographs, and the sheer scale of suspicion around him, the center of this story remained smaller and more concrete. It remained an 8-year-old girl on her way to school, a stranger who noticed she was in danger, an apartment door closing behind her, and a rescue that happened just before it was too late. What Tali Shapiro endured was savage enough to vanish a child completely. That did not happen. She lived. She recovered. She outlasted the man who tried to kill her. And in the years when prosecutors and juries were still trying to capture the full shape of Rodney Alcala's violence, she became something more than a name buried in the beginning of his record. She became one of the few people who had seen the inside of his violence and then survived long enough to confront him in court. That survival changed the story. It meant that when his crimes were finally laid out in full view, one of the people he had tried hardest to erase was still there to speak. There was nothing clean or inspiring about the way she survived. It started with terror, blood, brain injury, and a coma. It continued through years of distance, silence, and the long, uneven work of living after a trauma that entered her life before she was old enough to understand it. But survival does not have to look neat to be real. In Tali Shapiro's case, it looked like breathing when the officers thought she was gone. It looked like waking up after 32 days. It looked like growing old enough to reclaim her own name from a case file. And it looked like standing in a courtroom decades later, while the man who had once left her for dead sat close enough to hear her still alive. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.